Welcome back to the Knife Studio. Thanks for joining me for part 4 of this video series we're doing on the Bowie for the special online course we're building. Stick around to the end of the video, we're going to finish this project up. If you want to see how we got the Bowie to this stage so far, then be sure to check out the other 3 videos in this series. In the last video, we got the handle all fit up and we got it bedded in epoxy. I let that epoxy dry overnight and we're jumping back into the project the next morning now, and we need to get the handle off the tank. Whenever I can, I like to try to get the handle taken off after about 4 or 5 hours of the epoxy setting up, because then the epoxy is still a little pliable and it can be a little more forgiving. In this case, it was like 12 hours later, so I had a little bit of a hard time getting the handle off because the epoxy was fully cured. I was able to get it off in the end and achieve that perfect glove fit between the wood and tang. There's still quite a bit of shaping and sculpting to do on the handle. We'll go ahead and work on finishing that up now. I like to give myself plenty of guidelines to help me shape the handle and keep everything symmetrical. Now that the handle's a good 95 to maybe 98% shaped, I can move on to shaping the fittings. I start by getting the front spacer flush with the wood all the way around. And then I can go over it with a Sharpie and get some ink on there so we can scribe a line and be able to see it clearly. We want that line to be 20 to 45 thousandths of an inch from the edge of the spacer, and that'll give us a nice museum fit, or what I like to call a bullnose on the wood, where it transitions from wood to metal. I really like the museum fit because it adds another texture in your hand, because you have the wood that's slightly larger than the metal pieces. It can also help if you ever have shrinkage or expansion with the wood. To dome the end of the pommel, I go ahead and super glue it onto a piece of wood. The pommel gets pretty hot as I'm shaping the end of it, so if I was holding it with my fingers, I'd have to cool it down way more frequently than I have to with it glued to that piece of wood. It also comes in handy when we go to hand sand the end of the pommel. To remove it, all we gotta do is apply a little heat, and the super glue lets go. Don't breathe those fumes though. The handle's shaped, the front spacer's shaped, the pommel and pommel nut. Pretty much all we have left to shape is the profile of the guard. For a guard shape like this that has kind of an intricate shape on the edge, I like to use a template that is 1/4 of the guard, and then I can lay it on each side of the ricasso and on the top and bottom of the ricasso in all 4 positions to have a nice symmetrical guard layout all the way around the ricasso. I use the 1/4 template all the way around the ricasso in all 4 locations, and then we can get a perfectly symmetrical guard. You can see I'm not grinding the bottom part of the quillion all the way to the line because I want that a lot longer than the top part. So for that, I just kind of fake it in, and I have a couple scribe lines that I use as guidelines. We want the bottom a lot longer than the top because the edge drops down quite a bit from the handle. So if we had the bottom part of the guard the same length as the top part of the guard, it would look really off and just look kind of odd and out of place. So extending that bottom quillion down a good bit longer than the top one balances everything out and makes it look right when you look at it. It's hard to beat some good old-fashioned hand filing to get the edge of the guard nice and domed all the way around. Doming the edge of the guard will really add a lot to the look of the guard instead of leaving it flat, because it's going to be polished stainless steel with a mirror finish, so having that domed edge will just bounce light off of it in every direction. I clean up all the file marks with a 3M Scotch-Brite wheel. It works magic on parts like this. Then we can move on to buffing the edge of the guard. I also use a felt wheel to get down in the very bottom of that little groove right in the middle of the guard. Ooh, shiny. If you want to make a small accent groove, a really handy way of doing it is using the Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel set up in a drill press attachment. Then you can get the height just right and cut that nice even groove all the way around the spacer. I gotta get the hand files out though to do the rounded grooves on each side of that small groove. These rounded grooves on the front spacer and pommel are gonna look spectacular once we get this buffed to a mirror finish. There's a lot of hand sanding to be done first though. We've got to hand sand the handle, hand sand the fittings, hand sand the grooves in the fittings. The guard needs hand sanded. Oh, and there's still more hand sanding to do on the blade too. I want to round over the very corner of the wood since it's a little proud of the front spacer for our museum fit. You wouldn't want to leave that sharp because it just doesn't feel good in your hand. All it takes is a pencil, some files, and a little sandpaper to get a nice radius on the edge of the handle. Be careful not to round that corner over too far though, or you'll end up with a little gap between the wood and the metal. Got a little tiny chip or void or some kind of imperfection in the wood right here, and I definitely want to get it filled with some super glue before we move on. The edge of the pommel is a little sharper than I want, so I'm going to take it back over to the Scotch-Brite and round it over just a little bit more. We're moving right along to some finer grits now. I'm using some 1500 grit with WD-40 to help the paper cut longer. A lubricant isn't necessary for the coarser grits because the paper doesn't seem to clog up very fast, but once you get past 1000 grit, the paper seems to fill up with sanding dust immediately after touching the wood. But if you use a little bit of lubrication with it, it'll just cut and cut and cut for a long time. This handle's taken all the way up to 2500 grit, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of light buffing with some super fine pink buffing compound. I need to say, just for the record, I think this is the prettiest piece of wood I've ever used. I love the deep, dark blue color, and then it's got all these little hints of yellow. It reminds me of Van Gogh's Starry Night. Just a little more sanding to do on the fittings and they'll be ready for buffing too. There's also a little more sanding to do on the blade. I want the main bevels to have a 600 grit satin finish, and then I'm going to use some 1500 grit on accent areas just to give it a little shine and draw your eye, like on the clip, the spine, and under the ricasso. Might as well go ahead and sharpen this knife before we assemble it, and that way I don't have to worry about scratching the highly polished handle or fittings while I'm working on it. You can see I've also got most of the blade taped off, and that's just so I don't scratch the blade while I'm sharpening it either. I rough the edge in to get that burr started. Then I go to the finer side of the stone. I'll leather strope for a little bit. And then a butcher's rod to finish it up. It will shave. It's time to make like the Avengers and assemble. This Bowie is finished. I am so happy with it. I know you've probably heard me say this before, but this is probably one of my favorite knives. It seems like my favorite knife is always the next one that I complete, and it's no different with this one. I'm so pleased with it. The handle came out so shiny. The wood polished up so nice. It probably helped sanding it to 2500 grit, but it was just a really nice piece of redwood burl to start with. I think the highly polished stainless steel fittings really complement the wood handle. The shine just goes so well with the shine on the wood. When it comes to plain carbon blades, there's not much out there in my opinion that beats a super nice looking hand rubbed satin 600 grit finish. And that's exactly what we've got on here, with the clip and the spine of the blade accented to 1500 grit, just so there's a little extra shine when you move it around in the light. I really like this Bowie. It kind of makes me think of a rich gentleman in the southwest of America years and years ago when they used to carry knives like this. I also really like this knife because it really speaks to me as a piece of functional art. It's got artistic beauty and it's got a part of my soul and my heart put into it. And at the same time, it has that function put into it. We've got a solid handle construction. We've got some of the best materials you can get. We've got a fully hardened and heat treated blade that's been performance tested. So it's got both of those things that I look for. It'll look good on its own, or it'll make you look good while you're using it. Either way, it's a win-win. I also can't get over how beautiful this dyed redwood burl is. It's got this really, really deep blue color. And then if you shine a bunch of light on it, there's actually some lighter blue that pops out with these tiny, tiny bits of swirly yellow. It really reminds me of Van Gogh's Starry Night. And that's what we're gonna name this thing. Perfect name for this piece, Starry Night. Thank you, Van Gogh. Thanks for following along with this Bowie knife build. It was quite the journey to go on, and I'm glad I could share some of that journey with you. Be sure to keep your eyes open, because everything you saw in this 4-part series is just a small taste of what you're gonna learn in the full-blown online course we're making of this Bowie knife build. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!